You hear that? Recording in progress. Woohoo! Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to session number 6. And the topic this afternoon is swarming. And I suppose if you speak to the average person on the street, the classic vox pop, and you said to them, what do you know about keeping bees? You'd get swarming and stings. So let's see if I can get my so neatly tucked up on the end of a branch.
Can you go into presentation mode, please, Peter?
I knew somebody was going to ask an awkward question.
If you press F5 on your keyboard, it should start it automatically.
F and I.
No, F5 on your function keys
Oh,
on the top of your keyboard.
sorry, F5 function key. Beg your pardon. No.
You can do it through the menu at the top of the page as well. I think it's under the View tab.
Yeah, it's just what I'm looking at. Is that any better?
Tip top.
Okay, right, we're off. So the very first swarm I ever collected was actually basically what you're looking at on the screen. It was on the end of an apple tree, a young apple tree, basically a whip. It was about 6 or 7 feet tall. The weight of the swarm had bent it over, and the swarm was just hanging there, basically round about my chest height, give or take. Hang on a minute, guys. Somebody's got a live mic, so I'm going to mute them.
Oh.
No, I guess it's
message.
Not to.
Right, I think that's everybody muted now. Okay. So as I say, lovely, easy swarm to collect. The only problem being in this mode is if the thing's starting to move. Ah, there we go. Right.
See the direction keys in your keyboard, Pete? The left, right, up, down.
Yep.
You can use those to navigate left and right.
All right, lovely, thank you. So, what is swarming? Well, basically, it's sex, it's reproduction. It is a very, very powerful drive. Thirst, hunger, yeah, but sex is a very powerful one, arguably one of the most powerful, apart from possibly thirst. And like humans or any animal, some strains of bees have a more powerful urge than others. Some bees will actually swarm themselves virtually into the ground, and others will not even bother for long enough. And there's absolutely no way of knowing which way any particular colony is going to take things. One of the things that you're looking for every time you're doing an inspection, from the time that is that there are drones walking about on the combs, is you are going to be looking for signs of swarming, because it's something that you have to deal with. If you don't do anything, you'll remember I showed you the video of the scouts investigating an empty hive, a bait hive actually. And they were measuring up. Remember I said they were all out, or rather in, with their measuring tapes, checking it out. So the scouts will report that they found a suitable home. While the scouts are scouting, and this process can go on for several days, depending on weather, the queen will be put on a crash diet. And the reason that they're putting her on the diet is to stop her from laying eggs, put the egg laying on pause, and slim her down so that she's fit enough to fly with the swarm. Once the prime swarm has left, that is, the swarm with the mature mated queen has left, the remainder of the colony can either decide that that's more than enough, thank you very much. They will have, excuse me a minute. Yes, David, question in the text, please. Right, I'll carry on in the meantime. The parent colony will decide whether it's going to carry on with another swarm, which in this case would be called a cast, and it would be led by the first virgin to emerge. If they are an extremely swarmy colony, they may go on to cast and cast and cast and cast until there's virtually no bees left in the colony at all. From our point of view as beekeepers, that is an absolutely hopeless outcome, because any prospect of the colony's survival and or a crop of honey has literally flown away. I think you put your hand up by mistake, David, don't worry about it. So you'll hear people talking about they practice swarm prevention. There is no such thing. Bees are going to swarm. This is just a fact of life, and you have to accept it. And more to the point, as competent beekeepers, you not only are going to accept the fact that your bees at some point will swarm, but you have to know how you are going to deal with it. There is a lovely thing called supersedure, which I mentioned before. And this is where a colony will reproduce quietly without really any drama, no swarming, no flashy hanging around on trees and showing off. They just quietly allow a virgin to fly and mate, and they carry on quite often, two queens side by side, working away nice as you like. It happens more often than people realize, and people don't realize because most people don't clip and mark queens, so they haven't got a clue that the queen they're looking at in the spring is not the same queen that went into the winter. If the queens are marked, and especially if you change your paint each year, then this will become obvious. There is actually an official paint marking system, which I'm not going to bother you with, and I'm not going to bother you with it for the simple reason I once went for a job back in the day when I was young, keen, enthusiastic and looking for work, and it was with British Rail. Tells you how many years ago this was. And there was about 5 or 6 guys in front of me in the waiting room. First guy went in, he was about 10 minutes, came out, disappeared out the door. Next guy went in, he was about 8 minutes, came out, disappeared out the door. The time got progressively shorter, and all these guys just went in, came out, went in, came out. I went in, the guy says, right, before I waste your time and my time, he said, what number is this? And he pointed at a color blindness chart. And I said, oh, that's whatever it was. And he said, the next one? I said, oh, that's whatever it was. He says, for goodness sake, he says, you're the first guy that's not been green or red colorblind. The job was a train guard. So you can fairly safely say that being able to distinguish between green and red was quite important. And this is why I think the official color system falls down, because a remarkable number of people are either green or red colorblind, and green and red are two of the colors. When I was doing a lot with oilseed rape and consequently had a lot of yellow pollen in the colony, I did not like marking my queens yellow, another of the official colors. I find personally that blue and white stand out very nicely on the combs. Personally, again, because I'm not red or green colorblind, I'm quite happy to use those colors as well. So when it comes to marking queens, have a think about the sort of pollen sources that you're liable to have, and have a think about your own vision. There's no point in handicapping yourself and painting a queen green when you can't see green just because the color chart says you should. It's just silly. So having said all of that and dealt with our friend supersedure, oh, I should mention, you will read, if a colony has more than X number of cells, it is going to swarm, and if it has less than X number of cells, it's going to supersede. Absolute piffle. There is nothing finite in beekeeping, unfortunately. I cannot say to you if there's more than, 5.5 cells, they're going to swarm. And if there's less than 5.5 cells, they're going to supersede. Well, they don't deal in half cells for a start, but setting that apart, it just ain't like that. If they supersede, and bless their little cotton socks. And if they decide to swarm, well, by the time we're finished today, you'll have at least an idea of a plan of action. I like to look at a swarmy colony as an opportunity. It's not a pain, although it can be, but it opens up a door into a room that is full of possible outcomes. So you and the colony both want the same thing in effect, which is you want to have a colony headed by a mated queen, and in this case, you're going to have a bonny new mated queen, which is going to set you up for the winter. So your task as the bee person is to help the bees achieve what they want to achieve. And if, as a by-blow, you end up with an extra colony of bees, well, that's a little £200 bonus, isn't it? Because you can sell them. Now, your first indicator that bees are even, I wouldn't say even thinking about swarming, but they are going to be in a position to indulge, shall we say, in swarming, is when you see the boys starting to appear and walk round the comb. Now, you'll notice the big difference between the drone, the worker, and the queen, apart from the fact he's quite a chubby lad. He's got thundering great big eyes, all the better to see you with, my dear, when you are flying up and away from me. That's his best line of vision, about 60, between 40 and 60 degrees ahead of him and above him. Colonies do not like it if they don't have drones. They will take perfectly good combs, mess them about to make sure that they have drone brood in the colony, and the drones themselves seem to act apart from an insurance policy of being there to mate with virgins, they also seem to act like a heat reservoir. They're most often found on the outer combs of the colony in a national box with 11 frames. They'll be on the two sides nearest to the wall or in the gap with one comb between them and the wall, especially in a timber hive, it's a bit cooler. So having drones in the hive is no bad thing. The bees actually will insist on it. Now, you may remember I was talking about the bees getting queen pheromone, and I will just remind you that the queen produces a finite amount of pheromone, let's call it 100%. And as the retinue changes bees, because bees sort of become enthralled for a little while with looking after the queen, and then they drift away and another bee will take their place. And that's how the queen substance gets passed around the colony. The bees that have been grooming the queen drift away. They then start moving pollen around or nectar around, and there's an interchange of food between them and other bees. And as part of that interchange of food, the queen pheromone gets mixed in with the honey and the pollen, and it gets spread around the colony. But as the population in the colony gets bigger and bigger and bigger, the slice of the cake gets smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point where it's infinitely small and effectively not enough to actually inhibit the queen at all. Sorry, not inhibit the queen, inhibit the workers. And because of the transfer of food being a major component in the breakdown of the transfer of the queen substance, guess when this breakdown is going to happen? It's going to happen when there is a major honey flow, or nectar flow, as it's better technically called. Loads and loads and loads of nectar pouring into the colony. The bees are running around trying to, trying to deal with all this honey. And as a result, the transfer of the queen pheromone breaks down. The queen doesn't want to inhibit the drones, Emma. The queen substance inhibits the workers from losing awareness of the cohesion of the colony. The queen substance is the chemical that lets the workers know that the colony is operating in a normal set of circumstances and everything is under control and hunky-dory. It's when that queen substance dosage per bee gets to the point where it's virtually negligible, there's virtually nothing there, that the bees begin to think, well, possibly we might want to think about reproducing. So with the amount of queen substance dropping lower and lower and lower, the bees no longer feel that everything is absolutely perfect and it's time to do something about it. So there is a breakdown of communications, which is primarily this dosage of the queen substance getting to a negligible level. You also have quite a lot of bees who are trying to shift nectar. Their honey stomachs are full because they can't find anywhere to put this nectar to hang it out to dry, literally. And the inhibition on starting queen cells breaks down. And this is when you get the charged cup. Now, as you can see from the wall of the cup, this has been broken down, peeled back to show the larvae floating on the bed of royal jelly. These are empty queen cups, and I mentioned before when we were looking at comb, this is absolutely normal. As the colony gets a bit bigger, the bees will produce these cups, basically to have in the hip pocket. They're meaningless. They're just part of the normal furniture of the colony. Now, I was watching a video by one of the British video makers, and he stated quite firmly that once an egg is in the cup, it is a clear statement of intent. I would disagree, because I've seen eggs one day and 2-3 days later, I've looked and the eggs have vanished. So I don't think an egg in a queen cup is a definitive statement, but what is a definitive statement is when you see the cups the tips have now been flared. You see this wax has been built. No wax there, or there, or there. I mean, obviously the cups are built out of wax, but what I mean is those cups are just sat there as cups. Now they've been elongated because inside are larvae, and these larvae here actually are not far off, that those cells are going to be sealed over. You will remember 3 days an egg, 5 days a larvae, and hatching at 16 days. Now, when you see this, there is no doubt at all, tick tock, the clock is ticking. You have got about 10 days at the most from seeing this to having sealed queen cells and the chance of a swarm emerging. And this is one of the things that does slightly panic people, is because this clock is ticking. There is nothing you can do to stop it. And if you're not prepared, it is going to be stressful. Now the cells are sealed, and you think that cell is a much better cell than that cell. Well, maybe. This cell could actually go further back into the comb and be just as deep as this one. It's just, it doesn't look as if it's as deep. So what happens next? Stand by, Lenora, stand by. Knocking out queen cells. People tell you, oh, you just knock them out and that's it, job done, they'll forget all about it. Aha, really? Right, without wishing to inflict blushes on anybody, were you ever in a situation where you were hot to trot, you were in a parked car, it was all steamy, and somebody rapped on the door and interrupted? That was a major anticlimax. It was horrible. How do you think the colony feels? There they are. They put all that effort into building those queen cells, and this muggle great giant comes along with a lump of metal and smashes all your good work. I mean, I don't think they'd just be calling you a vandal. They'll be calling you a blah, blah, blah vandal. So no, it doesn't actually achieve anything apart from, admittedly, it might knock things back a couple of days, but the bees will react to it. And if they are determined to swarm, they will swarm. They will actually swarm on an open cell if push comes to shove. And this is a virgin queen here. who has just emerged from this cell. Now, if I can get a bit clever for a minute, I might be able to show you a video, but I've got to get out of this first. So just bear with me for a second.
Press escape.
Yeah, my keyboard's not the same as yours. That's not working. Bother. This is why I was a little bit worried about going into this. Ah, here we go. Right, I'm there, she's there. Where's Brave? Will do. Can everybody see calmer beekeeping, technique of beekeeping? Yep, bingo. Okay. Very, very short video, and I'm going to stop it a couple of times. The queen has cut round and she is coming out there. Now, that end cap, sometimes it's still attached to the cell and it's called the trap door. As the virgin pushes out, it opens to let her out, but it stays attached. And just to complicate things, you'll get a robbing bee that will go in to harvest the remainder of the royal jelly that's still at the base of the cell, because if that virgin has been properly fed, she hasn't managed to eat all the royal jelly. And just to complicate things even further, is some bright spark of a bee or three will reattach that trapdoor, and it's not unusual to poke a cell with a hive tool and find instead of the virgin, there's a dead bee inside, and you think it's gone horribly wrong. It hasn't gone horribly wrong at all. Young Miss here is out alive and well. It's just the bees have stuck that trapdoor back on. Now, you'll see the bees don't really pay any attention to her. She don't behave as if she's a mated queen. And here's the boys. And here we go. Here's the mating. Queen's flying. Two drones try to get her, bang him. And now he's got her. He's going to curl round, insert his phallus, inseminate her, and then there's a pop, and he drops, and that's him dead. Now, if I go back just a second there, you'll see, not far enough, you'll see the end of phallus still stuck in the queen, as in there, that yellow lump that's hanging off her tail. Now, bear in mind, the next drone to mate with her will fly up, he'll clasp her around her abdomen, he will remove the phallus of the last drone to mate with her and insert himself, mate, and then die. This can happen multiple times. So in a colony, you don't have just a queen and a bunch of workers. You have a queen and a bunch of workers who are all subsets of half sisters. And this is where the genetics get somewhat complicated, to put it mildly. Right, so one of the most important glands involved in the swarming process is the Nasimov gland, and it is this little streak here, that whitish streak in between this black band and the tip of the tail. The bees fan backwards. They lift the abdomen up in the air. They curl the tail over to expose this gland, and they fan air over it, which is effectively like wolf whistles going out on the breeze. Come on, girls, this is where we are. I've been asked if we can ask a few questions. Yes, by all means. Can't see the slide. Which slide? The drone.
The one
Oh, sorry, hang on a minute.
the
Just a second,
slide.
just a second, just a second. Right, can we see the slide, the Nazimov now? Yes,
No, it's still on the video.
it's still on the video.
Still on the video.
Yeah.
Is it a desktop keyboard you're using, Pete, or a laptop?
It's a Logitech. Right, hang on a minute. Let's go back to basics here. It's a Logitech, and it doesn't have conventional shortcuts on it, just to be make life more interesting.
Because I was going to say, if you do Alt and Tab, you should be able to flick between the apps that you're using.
Yeah, that will work. It's just I've just lost the entire presentation. No, I haven't. Here we go. Right, guys, can you see this bee with its abdomen up in the air?
No.
No. Jolly good. Question now is why not? Well, share screen is on.
I think we nearly saw it there. There, it's there. That's it.
Yeah.
All right, can we see it now?
Yes.
Hey, brilliant. Right. This, can you see where my cursor is now? Just on this white streak.
Yes.
Right. That's the Nazimov gland, and that's the gland that's sending out the pheromones, that's calling in the rest of the bees and telling them this is where you want to be. Follow this smell and you're coming home. Okay? And in the swarming process, it's a very important gland. Now, swarms, people get very excited about swarms, and they gallop around the countryside chasing them. I would just like to point out it's only a swarm, it's not life and death. The vast majority of swarms actually die in the wild. They don't make it. Safety, safety, safety. And I'm talking about your personal safety, not the bees. People get really carried away and they get a bit obsessive. And so if you're thinking about scaffolds and great big long ladders, are they going to stay long enough for you to collect the gear and go and get them? And the answer is very likely no. I apologize for the typo. Grammarly, for whatever reason, does not recognize a number in a word as being an error. And with my since my operation for carpal tunnel, I have a nasty habit of overshooting the E and pressing the 3, which is a bit annoying. Anyway, have we got any questions before we go on to collecting a swarm?
Yes, I've got two, Pete, if that's okay.
Yeah, go on then.
The first one is, why, when the bees are generally so clever, do they put the cap back on the queen cup? And secondly, why are there more than one supersedure cell? Why do they not just make 1 or 2 as a backup? Why did that slide show maybe 5 or 6? Surely they don't want 5 or 6 queens, or to have to kill other, you know, like 3 or 4 other queens if they all come out as queen cells.
I think the supersedure answer is it gives them a choice. They can pick, or it could also be the first virgin that's out of the cell takes that choice away from the bees and kills the other ones.
But they're all virgin queens that come out of those cells, aren't they?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And why do they put the? Why would they go to the bother of trying to put that cup back on the cap back in a cup on a queen cup?
I'm going to be dead honest and so tell you, I don't know.
Right. Okay. It seems a very odd thing to do for bees.
I
They're
know
so clever,
it is,
doesn't it?
but
Right.
I almost think they do it just to confuggle the beekeeper.
Right. Okay. It's interesting anyway. Right. Thank you. Thanks.
Because it is quite disconcerting when you flick that cap off with your hive tool and this dead bee drops out and you're like, oh, the virgin's dead. No, she's alive and well and elsewhere, getting on with it.
See the queen substance stroke pheromone you talk about, that's what's coming out of the Nasanov gland?
No, the queen substance is coming off the queen herself. The Nasanov gland is purely a chemical, a pheromone that the bees waft to tell the other bees that is where they need to locate to.
So the queen doesn't have a Nasanov gland, it's only the drones that have it?
Just the workers.
Oh, it's just the workers that have
just
it?
the
Right.
workers.
Okay.
It's when the swarm is clustering, and also when the swarm has found a location to take occupation of, that's when they will fan the Nasimov.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask a question quickly?
By all means.
I just wondered, what happens if drones from the same colony mate with the new virgin queen from that colony?
It's
for genetic wise?
Well, that's a very good question, because the answer to that is mostly they don't. There are areas known as drone congregation areas, and nobody knows precisely why they are where they are. And the virgins can fly several miles actually to these drone congregation areas, and they mate there with drones from multiple colonies. So it's almost like in the old days, the dance hall. You know, the girls who are interested in the boys go to the dance hall to meet the lads. And the lads in the dance hall are from all over the town. They're not just from your own estate. They're not just from your own street. It gives a wider gene pool to pick from.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Okay. Right. When a swarm has landed, now I used to be in a rather privileged position of getting phone calls because I had my number out with various authorities and police forces and councils and what have you. And I would get phone calls saying, I've got a swarm in my garden, usually about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I said, right, okay. How long have they been there? Oh, they've just arrived. Okay. Whereabouts are you, etc., etc. I would say, I'll come round about 7 o'clock. And I'd get a kind of puzzled reaction at the other end of the phone. Long experience taught me that if I threw everything into the car, took off like the proverbial scalded cat, skidded to a halt in front of the house, I would see a black cloud rising and disappearing into the distance. One swarm, settled, established they had the queen, scouts had come back, you might want to come and have a look at this. Right, girls, we're off. And away they went. And I got bitten with that more times than I care to think about. So I got a bit wiser in my aging process. In fact, one of my classics was I got a call to a tenement building in Cooter, just on the outside, the outskirts of Aberdeen. Julie drove out there. Woman came out and said, you see the bees up the chimney? I said, yes, I can see the bees up the chimney. And there was about 16 chimneys for this block. I said to her, are you sure that's your chimney? Oh, yes, 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 definitely that's my chimney. And I said, you don't want them in your chimney, do you? She said, no, I don't want them in the chimney at all. Right. I said, light, I just does the chimney work? Yes, fireplace works. I said, great. Can you light a little fire and put some of your grass clippings on top of it so we get a nice cloud of smoke? Yes, I'll do that, not a problem. So I stood outside and I watched this chimney. And about 10 minutes later, smoke starts to appear from the chimney pot next to the one that the bees were paying attention to. It wasn't her chimney at all. So, you know, getting excited about swarms and dashing off to collect them doesn't always pay. It's sometimes better just to give it a bit of time. If they do go into the distance, they go into the distance. They're somebody else's problem. And you have to remember that for the general public, a swarm is a pest. It is a nuisance. I once went to see a gentleman in a village called Stanley, just off the A9. And it was what I can only describe as a picture postcard village. It was really quite immaculate, bar this one house, which was somewhat decrepit, to put it mildly. In the garden, and I use the word garden very, very loosely, the weeds were 6 feet high and growing. Reputedly, there was 40 hives. Well, I don't know, I couldn't see them all. But I'll tell you this, there was 18 swarms hanging on the garden wall, and there wasn't a single container on the premises that didn't have a hole to catch a swarm in, not one. I was damn near crying when I left, but there you go. And when I said to him, what do you say to people when they say that, you know, your swarms are a pest? Oh, he says, I just tell them their name mine. I said, how many beekeepers are in the village? Oh, there's just me. So don't be a public nuisance. Now, how do you collect a swarm? Well, what I do is I lay a sheet, assuming we've got the swarm hanging neatly on the end of a tree. Let's just play, you know, the perfect scenario. You arrive, there's a little tree in the garden, the swarm's hanging on the end of it. It's about 3 feet off the ground, and there's a lovely evening, no rain, no wind, tickety-boo. Lay a sheet or a piece of material on the ground, shake the bees into your container, and I find that straw skeps are about the best container of the lot because it's nice and rough on the inside for the bees to get a grip of. Remember, there are no combs for them to hold on to. Shake the bees into your container, set the container on the material with a stone propping it up. The bees will then start to spread out the front or over the surface of the skep stroke container. They will face the container, they will raise their abdomens, they will tip over the tip of their abdomens, and they will start fanning, sending out smells and pheromones from the Nasimov gland. That's what they do. And what they're doing is they're saying to the bees who took off when you shook the bulk of the swarm into your container, come on girls, this is where we are. And being a textbook scenario, after half an hour, maybe an hour, during which time you've had a cup of tea with the entranced people whose garden the swarm was landed in, you will find that as the temperature begins to drop, the bees will have gone inside. They are all in your skep. You remove your stone, gently settle the skep on top of the material, fold the material over the skep in such a way that it ain't going to come unraveled, and take the swarm to the car and off you go with it. Very, very straightforward. However, these days, there is the added complication. You will get the proud people whose garden the swarm have landed in utterly determined to get the video photograph for little Johnny, the grandson, or Auntie Betty who lives out in Australia or whatever, and they will be determined to get as close as possible to the action. Now, I fully understand on the one hand the attraction, but on the other hand, if they get stung, guess who they're going to blame? And they ain't going to be standing looking at themselves in the mirror and going, say, what an idiot I am. They're going to be looking at you and saying, you don't know what you're doing. It's because of you I've got stung. Bloody bees, blah, blah, blah. So there's a little bit of social nicety, shall we say, that has to be juggled with these people, because we're very much a blame culture these days. So, having got your swarm home, and I'm not going to go into dealing with swarms that are spread out over 15 branches. These are the sorts of things that you can either look up or you'll see stuff on YouTube. Basically, you shake as many bees as you possibly can into your container and set it down and hope that they will fan themselves in. But there is also, when they're like that, they're not clustered particularly tightly, there's quite a high risk that you will lose the whole situation. The whole swarm will go. If they're not in a nice tight cluster, they can be quite difficult to deal with. And one of the scenarios that is possible when they are not in a nice tight cluster is you are not just dealing with a mated queen. There might be several virgins in the mix as well. But those ones, they're difficult. And there's no way of telling until you've got them back, really. People will say, oh, I brought the swarm home, I tipped them into a box, and the next morning they'd gone. Swarms are flighty. Getting a swarm to settle, there's two major tricks that you can use. One is you can give them a frame of open brood, and the other one is have a queen excluder between the brood box and the floor. So in other words, the queen is stuck. And if the queen is stuck in the box, you've caught the swarm because they won't leave her behind. Yes, David.
Just when you mentioned putting a queen excluder on the bottom of the brood box,
yeah,
can that be done to mitigate swarming in the first place?
You can, but again, you're frustrating them. And frustrating them is useless, because sooner or later you will make a mistake, or they will dig out, they'll tunnel out, and they'll go. You've got to remember, we are talking reproduction. It's not a minor drive, it is a major drive. People have done it, yes, but all it does is thwarts the colony, and that's not our project. We are not here to thwart the bees. We are here to work with them. It's by achieving mutual aims that beekeeping becomes a success and not a disaster. I can't put it any stronger than that. Okay. Do not feed the swarm immediately. Okay. Why not? Well, a textbook swarm has tanked up on honey because they know they are going. They've got their little walking sticks over their shoulders with their spotted handkerchief looking rather soggy because it's got half a pint of honey in it. And there's 30-odd thousand of those half pints of honey. Not obviously half pints of honey, but they fill their honey tummies ready to go. Why they fill their honey tummies? Because as soon as they get into a location that they are happy with, they are going to start building wax like they are going out of fashion. And this is where the textbook business of day this and day that is a period of time that the bee will do such and such goes out the window. It's all hands on deck. It's all hands to the pumps. Every bee that can possibly build wax is building wax. So, because the bees have got approximately 3 days of rations with them, you want them to burn through that as quick as possible. So don't feed for the first 3 days. Why? What might be in that honey? Last week, I was banging on for long enough about disease. This is why you don't want to feed immediately. You want them to use up the honey in their tummies and get rid of it, just on the off chance there's nasties in it. Sorry, Andrew, royal jelly? Oh. No. Right. Hang on a minute, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. The point of this not feeding is to help them use up that honey, and if there's any nasties in it, it will get consumed. Now, those of you who listened to Murray McGregor the other week, he was talking about keeping swarms isolated. And he mentioned, almost as an aside, that his team had collected a swarm, because they do that as a sort of a public duty. And it went into their isolation unit. And on investigation, that swarm was riddled with varroa. And that year, at that point in time, officially, there was no varroa in Scotland. And yet here he was with a swarm caught in Scotland full of varroa. So swarms can have nasties. It's not the best idea to take swarms back to your home apiary and add them to whatever hives you have on the go already. So just something to bear in mind. They don't necessarily come without issues. Bait hives. Now, there was some research done several years ago now, probably a couple of decades ago, where a chappie in America got umpteen different colonies to swarm. He had various sizes of containers in various locations. And from that research, he came out with a 40-litre container at 15 meters high was the ideal volume and location for a bait hive. Now, my experience is quite different to this for the simple reason I don't live in the States. I don't deal with American-sized colonies, which, like the Americans, tend to be on the large size. And we use or tend to use smaller hives, which in turn means our colonies aren't as big. And a lot of us do not use Italian bees, which again means our colony sizes tend to be smaller. So 40 litres is, roughly speaking, a Langstroth brood box. I've taken swarms. Well, I haven't taken swarms, I should say. I've had swarms hive themselves in 5-frame nute boxes. And the very fact that the colony has hived itself in a 5-frame nute box says they were more than happy with the size of the container. It was their pick. They could have had brood boxes because I had stacks of equipment sitting on a site. They chose not to use the big boxes. They wanted a little box. So who am I to say no? A piece of old comb in your bait box is extremely useful because there is pheromones in there that say to a swarm, this space has been used by a successful colony in the past. It may well suit you very nicely. The essential oil, lemongrass oil, mimics some of the pheromones. And again, if you splitter that inside the bait hive, you will increase your chances. Now, I happened to be in a garden centre 3 or 4 years ago, and there was a chap there with the most enormous top bar hive. It must have weighed about 200 weight alone. And he was laying off to an enthralled audience and telling them that all they had to do was spend several £100 buying this thing, stick it in their garden, and they would get a swarm. Not might, not maybe, no possibilities, no weasel words whatsoever. They were going to get a swarm. And I thought to myself, I'm either going to have to bite my tongue, turn on my heel and go, or I'm going to wreck the guy's performance. I thought, well, who am I to wreck the guy's performance? So I turned on my heel and went tasting blood as I did so. There are no guarantees in catching swarms. It's like me saying to you, okay, here's a quid, go and buy a lottery ticket and you're going to get the big one tonight. Several million reasons say that ain't going to happen. Now then, artificial swarms, keeping control, but, and this is the big but, this is what freaks everybody out. It's the queen finding aspect. You must find the queen in order to carry out an artificial swarm. In actual fact, there are dodges to get around that, but primarily queen finding is needed. So when you approach a colony to go queen finding, use as little smoke as possible, preferably none at all. You don't want to upset the queen and get her up on her tippy toes and running around. Having gone through the colony a couple of times and you haven't found the queen, there is a little trick you can use to load the odds in your favour. In an 11-comb brood box, there are 12 gaps. Now, queens don't like light. They like the dark. Now, as you can see, I missed my vocation. I should have gone to art college, but it wasn't to be. My masterpiece got rejected by the admissions committee for some very peculiar reason I've never understood. So we have got a brood box. This is a square line here. One brood box. And we have got 6 combs, the green lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, you get the idea. And that in turn means there are now, in between comb, 3 gaps, plus the 2 gaps at the outside. So we've got gap 1, bother. Gap 1, gap 2, gap 3. Really, you can ignore this one and that one, because if you've got your spacing even, there'll be as much light coming in there as there is coming in there. Once you've got your box set up like this, go away and do something else for 20 odd minutes. The brood that's on the frames that you've laid at the side of the box will be absolutely fine. Pardon me. They'll be warm enough. And in 20 minutes, you've given the queen time to get over any fright that she's experienced with you looking for her, and she will have gone into one of those 3 gaps. So you pull that comb, have a quick look at the face here, stick it down, lift this comb, have a quick look at the face, so on and so on. If you can't find her, put the combs back, lay them in their sets like this, the 3 sets, and go away and leave it another 20 minutes. Sooner or later, you will get her in those gaps. Now, it's an odd thing about finding queens. It takes practice. And as a beginner, how are you going to get that practice when you've only got 1 or possibly 2 colonies? And this is the sticking point. I was lucky in that I was invited by a lovely lady who is no longer with us, Mrs. Tom. And I always make a point of mentioning Mrs. Tom when I do this talk, because she gave me a very precious gift. She taught me how to find queens. And the odd thing about it is, once you've spotted your first 5 or 6, your eye is tuned in for life. That's it. Once you've got it, you've got it. It's like seeing eggs. Times I've shown people where eggs are on a comb, I can't see them. Turn the comb a little bit to the light, I still can't see them. Keep moving the comb slowly until you see that little grain of rice at the bottom of the cell. Oh! And once you hear that, oh, you know, that's it. That person will see eggs, if they want to, for the rest of their lives. It's the same with queen spotting. Once you've learned how to spot her, and it's the weirdest thing, it's almost as if it's subliminal, because queens move in a slightly different way. Their legs are longer, and the whole way they move in the comb is different to workers or drones. Once you have that in your eyes, you've got it for life. But how do you get the chance to go through multiple colonies? Well, find somebody that's got multiple colonies and say to them, is there any chance I could come spend a couple of hours with you and practice queen finding? And if they're a decent beekeeper who knows that they owe to their predecessors, they'll say, yeah, by all means, I'll come, you come and spend some time with me and I'll show you. And if anybody is down in this neck of the woods, the offer is open. So that's pairing combs. Next one is clipping. Now, we talked about this last week. If you don't clip and you're working a 7-day inspection, you can lose swarms because you've opened the colony, there is a charged queen cell. You think, well, it's not going to be sealed for another 6 or 7 days. I'll sort it out in the next inspection. The bees decide they're going to swarm in an open cell and you've lost them. If your queen is clipped and that swarm decides to emerge on an open cell, you haven't lost the swarm. You've lost the queen, admittedly, but you have not lost the swarm. It gives you that little bit of extra time to get things sorted out. Now then, artificial swarm number 1. And this is the Pagden. You take off the roof, the supers and the queen excluder and place the old hive with the floor and the crown board more than 1 meter to one side of the hive location, right? You put a new floor and brood box with frames of foundation and or drawn comb on the original site and remove 2 frames from the middle to create a gap. So brand new brood box with the floor obviously on the old location with a gap in the middle. Not exactly rocket science. You inspect the old brood box and find the queen. Now this is where it gets sticky. Place her on a frame with the unsealed brood in the gap in the new box. Ensure there are no queen cells on this frame. If the queen is on the only frame with queen cells or the best queen cells, move the queen to a different frame so those queen cells can be retained. When you are dealing with queen cells and queen hunting, do not shake the frame with queen cells on it. You will damage or potentially damage the incipient virgins in those queen cells. Queen cells have to be handled delicately. Do not shake their frames. Return to the old colony with the eggs, brood and nurse bees and inspect the colony for queen cells. Select a nice large queen cell, leave in place in the center of the brood, carefully close up the gaps, replace the 2 spare frames, replace the crown board and roof. In other words, put the colony back together with one nice queen cell and queenie poos on the original site. All the flying bees will go back to the original site. And what was the original brood box now has all the brood and a queen cell, and that's it. And that queen will emerge, fly, hopefully mate nicely, and start off another colony for you. And then after 6 or 7 days, relocate the old hive more than 1 meter to the other side of the new hive. Newly flying, foraging bees trying to return to the old hive will drift the new hive, thus adding to the numbers of the artificial swarm. Do you know what? I've never actually done that. I could never see the point, and it didn't seem to make a blind bit of difference. But as you can tell from this, it all depends on finding the queen. So, as you can see, I missed my career in the art school line of business. So, a way of doing the same thing but vertically is the Demaree, and the Demaree was invented by Mr. Demaree circa 1880-ish, give or take. Now, the beauty of this is you don't actually have to find the queen, right? You've had a double brood box down the bottom, brood box on top. But before you leave this setup to get on with things, after 3 or 4 days, you can check the 2 brood boxes and see where there are fresh eggs. If there's fresh eggs in this box at the top, you've obviously got your boxes the wrong way around, and it's the ideal chance to set it to rights. So in other words, this box, if it had fresh eggs, will go down the bottom, and the brood box without the queen goes up on top. Because the setup is floor, the brood box with the queen, queen excluder, 2 supers, the brood box with the cells or a virgin, and a little entrance is on the top. And you just leave them to get on with it. The queen in the bottom should be there with 1 or 2 frames of brood and a load of foundation or empty frames, and that gives her a whole brood box to lay up. While she's busy doing that, the bees are still working in the supers. The queen excluder between the top super and the top brood box enables the bees to travel between the 2. So if they've got honey to store, they can't store it above, which is what they would normally do because there's nowhere to put it. So they'll carry on working in your supers. So it's actually a way of controlling swarming, also making increase if you want, and also allowing the honey, if there is a honey flow, to carry on being gathered and stored in the 2 supers. It's a pretty neat system. And just to add another layer of complication to it, what Money McGregor does to build his colonies up to go to the heather is he has his queen in the bottom brood box, but he gives her 2 brood boxes to work, and he allows the virgin to hatch, fly, and mate in the top box. He leaves the whole thing, pardon me, on location for some weeks to build up to strength. And when he takes the thing up to the heather, he splits the brood boxes so that nobody's humping more than 1 brood box, marks them accordingly to which hive they belong to, takes them to the heather, reassembles them as 3 brood boxes full of brood, supers on top, stands well back and lets them get on with it. And boy, do they get on with it. So, oops, daisy. That was accidental. Back to share screen again. Back to there. I think I possibly rattled through a lot, actually. Yeah, Devaney was the last one. Okay, so have we got any questions? If you want to unmute, just unmute yourself. That should be possible now.
Presumably, you're going to want to make these swarms happen so that you can grow the number of hives that you've got. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to. Once you've got your virgin mated, you can quite easily bump off the old queen and unite the 2 parts together to go back to 1 colony.
Isn't there a potential risk that your queen may have been mated by one of the drones in your hive and lead to inbreeding?
It's unlikely because the virgins fly to the drone congregation areas, as I mentioned.
I was just wanting to check, that was all.
Okay. It's like what I was saying about the dance halls. It helps to spread the gene pool.
Aye, and presumably, I mean, my initial thought is to go with a buckfast type strain. But I know you also get, like, for example, your Carniolans. Can the 2 strains interbreed with each other?
Yes. The problem with deciding to go buckfast is you are buying in what is effectively a hybrid, right? It's a man-made bee.
Yeah, because my understanding is that it's been bred specifically for docility and not swarminess.
Really? You are buying
That's
a
my
hybrid.
understanding. I never said it was correct. I just said it was my understanding.
No, David, you're buying a hybrid. And it's not a simple hybrid of, say, you know, a Frisian cross with a Charolais. It's a multiple hybrid. And the problem is, once you've had them a year and that virgin flies and mates, you've then got that hybrid cross with goodness knows what. And
Because my understanding is if you keep buckfasts, you should really be requeening them every year. Is that right?
yes. So
interesting choice. Interesting choice of cattle breed, by the way. I know a family that used to breed Charolais,
yeah.
and the bulls are absolutely mental.
You look up a Belgian blue and you'll see a seriously big bull.
That's
Right.
the genetic
Setting
defect,
bulls
though.
aside,
They can't keep the fat.
setting bulls aside, if you want to run sort of pure buckfast, you are tying yourself into buying in queens and practicing queen introduction every year, and the queens are going to run somewhere around about, to pick a figure, roughly 35 quid a year each. 10 colonies, that's 350 quid. You know, it's not a line I would pick myself.
I've got a friend who he had buckfast bees. I think he's still got them actually. He bought them 3 years ago, but I get the impression this guy basically went onto eBay and bought an instant hive kind of thing.
Yeah,
yeah. Because he's not done any studying, or he's not done this kind of thing that I'm doing, that you're doing. And I think it was last year he tried to open the hive up and they just went absolutely bananas.
Mm-hmm.
And he ended up in quite a bad way after it.
Yeah, no, it can happen.
I would presume what's happened there is that the queen's hybridized and she's picked up some aggressive traits.
Yep. I mean, that can happen with any strain of bee, though, to be fair. Has anybody else got any other comments on swarming?
Me, please.
Go on then.
I'm just wondering, how do the virgin queens know where the drone areas are? Do the drones release some sort of pheromone to say, here we are?
Yes. But the real question is, why do the drones know to go to that specific area to congregate in the first place? And there's still a lot of work being done on that. People have talked about ley lines, they've talked about magnetic forces. The odd thing about these drone congregation areas is that they seem to be in the same place each year. So that one's a bit of a mystery. I can't tell you what I don't know, so I'm not going to tell you any lies.
Okay.
Yep. Any more for any more?
Can I ask, Pete, if the drones don't have Nasanov glands and it's only the workers that have them, where are the pheromones coming from in the drones?
Right, the straight answer to that is, off the top of my head, I don't know, but a fairly quick Google will give you the answer.
Right, okay, because it is the drones that are enticing the queen to the drone congregation areas, isn't it?
Yes,
But
there's
we-
pheromones coming off the drones. I mean, they must have a gland of some sort, but I'm not that up on the anatomy, to be honest.
Right, okay, no problem, I can look that up.
Yeah. Hello. 1 second, people. Hello, you all right?
Yeah.
Appalling journey. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's the good lady safely home. Anybody else? Gone very quiet.
Well, I'm getting really in front of myself here. But I've got a buddy who's a tattoo artist and he's designed a label for me. Would anybody like to see my brand?
Okay.
Is it on your body? Depends where it is, David.
Give me a second. I'm just trying to see if I can put the picture into the chat. I don't actually have a computer at the minute, so I'm doing everything through my phone. No, I can't do it through the phone.
This is kind of verging on to next week, but just be aware, David, that when it comes to honey labels, there are rules and regulations that have to be followed literally to the letter.
Yes, I've done a wee bit of research on that, and I'm wanting to take the advice of someone who's actually in the game rather than what I've read on the internet.
I will give you the name of a guy that I use, and he is absolutely on the money. He knows his stuff inside out.
Lovely.
Can I ask, because I bought in a kind of farm shop last week a pot of plum jam, and when I got it home there was no best before expiry date, nothing to say when it was produced or to say what content of plums or sugar was in it, nothing at all.
Illegal.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Yeah, what I mean, if you're upset by it, I would take it to trading standards.
To be honest, I really like the lady, and they're trying to set up their own business, and it is delicious. But when I looked at it, I thought, my goodness, we wouldn't get away with that if we were selling that as a pot of honey, because of all the ins and outs that need to be on it.
Was the person selling it the person that produced it?
That I don't know.
Because there's a difference there. It's two different crimes, if you like. The producer should have all the correct legal information. There should be a lot number, there should be a best before number, and they should have a record of who they've sold, what they've sold to who. The shop, on the other hand, they're taking it as given that the person that is producing the goods that they are selling to that shop has gone through the appropriate hoops and the product they are buying is legal to sell. It could be that the shop needs a heads up that the supplier is not doing the right job and exposing them to issues.
Yeah, because ultimately it's probably going to be the person I bought it from that would be responsible for any problems. I mean, I'm not going to say anything because I think they were clearly snowed under with work. They're trying to develop this farm shop, and you know, I was happy to buy it. It does taste lovely, but I did think it was very unusual when I got it home. I was thinking, my goodness, there's no best before date, there's no product date,
Yeah.
there's no content, there's no. It just says something like sugar plums and. I
Yeah,
don't know. Was it
but
sugar plums and
the farm
pectin or
shop's
something?
exposing themselves to a visit from trading standards.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, a quiet heads up that, you know, possibly you're not aware that this product isn't really fit for sale wouldn't go amiss. I'd possibly save them from grief down the line, you know.
Yeah, I think so, maybe, yeah.
But yes, there's all sorts of rules and regulations. I mean, back in the day when I was really commercial, I had a visit from trading standards, and they told me I had to have a set of scales with stamped weights. I mean, I don't think it's the case now, because in their view, selling a product with 5 grams under the stated weight was an offence, but equally and just as bad was selling the same product with 5 grams over. Now, you would think the 5 grams over, you'd be on the right side of the law, but their view was that you were then having an unfair advantage over your competitors. So on the one hand, you're cheating the customer. On the other hand, you're cheating the competition, if you like.
I've emailed that picture over to you.
Okay.
Give you a chuckle if nothing else.
Okay, we got any more on swarming?
Can I ask a quick question before you go?
Go on then.
It's just jumped into my head. Right, so the buckfast bees are sort of the hybrid bees,
Yeah.
and ideally you want the sort of pure strains, shall we
Yes.
say? So in swarming, how do you know what it is that you've potentially caught if you get a swarm?
You don't. Without doing DNA analysis, you haven't got a clue. You can have a rough idea by looking at them. You know, if they're a really yellow bee, they might well be leaning towards the Italian side of things. If they're really black, they could be native mongrels, or they could be carniolans. And if they're a brown bee, the chances are that they are buckfast. But as to knowing specifically what they are, the only answer is DNA.
Yeah, okay. That's fine.
Okie dokie. Right then. I'm going to wrap it now because my beloved has come back looking rather weary. So I'm going to go and give her some moral support.
Okay, thanks, Pete.
All righty. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Thanks again, guys. Cheers for now.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
See you next week.